Hi everyone, welcome to this Heroines Book Month event. My name's Sarah Nicholson, I'm the director of the Heroines Festival. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm hosting this meeting from the lands of the Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So I'm joined today by Dr. Lee Kofman. Lee is an editor, a writer of fiction and non-fiction, and she's speaking with us today about her work of creative non-fiction, Imperfect. Just as some housekeeping, if you'd like to ask a question while someone is speaking, you can use the thumbs up function and I'll look for that and call on you, or you can write your question in the comment box if you'd prefer to have me read it for you. So welcome, Lee. It's lovely to speak to you. I wanted to start by asking a question myself. So I've heard you speak about Imperfect before, and that you wrote it in order to answer questions that you had. And I actually deeply understand that in myself. When I was writing my PhD, a lot of it was motivated by my questions about what it was to be a woman, the history of women, why I was in the position that I was as a woman in the world. So my question for you is, in writing Imperfect, do you still have those questions? Were they exhausted by the process of writing the book, or are they still alive for you, but in a different form?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah. I've been talking about this book for over 2 years now, and I thought I already heard any question that could be, but this is a new one. Hello, everyone. Yeah, look, I actually started. This is a very good point about how I actually write books. Whatever book I write, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I always have some kind of, even a short work, I usually start from a question. And I try to exhaust them. So with Imperfect, I don't know if at the moment it feels like I got the answers I wanted. My questions were just very briefly, very really straightforward. One is, but very hard to answer. One was, can appearance impact on our lives? And if yes, then in which ways? And it does, it impacts really heavily from what I sort of know from my experience, but also from what I found as I was doing this research. And the other question was, if the influence of appearance on our lives is not in line with our designs, with what we want, what can we do about it? And again, there's a lot we can do. Not miracles, but we can do stuff. So I think I more or less answered it for me for now. But as I write in the book, one of my sort of main points about appearance was that how appearance affects us, including how we feel about it, I don't see it as something kind of done and sealed and permanent. It's a bit like when we talk about self-acceptance. I always suggest to talk about it as a verb as opposed to a noun, because I don't think in real life it works like this, but we work on ourselves, we're trying to love our body, to accept ourselves, and here we are, we accepted it, and it's a nice shiny object, and we put it on the shelf and it stays there. For me, at least, it doesn't work like this in reality. And I read quite a lot of psychological research that talks about these fluctuations as well in how we, in many other emotional experiences too, like grief, for example. And look, bodily, for those of us who have grief around our bodies, it's a very sort of strong feeling as well. And for us, it can fluctuate too. So some researchers suggest to think about our appearance and our relationship to this as a sort of, if we have a problem with our appearance, or if society has a problem with our appearance, they suggest to think about it as a dormant stressor, something that sort of can be asleep. Right now, for example, I've written a book about my scars. The book is about my scars. That's sort of the overarching narrative of the book, a story of how I got my scars and how they have impacted me. But then I've gone and interviewed a lot of people. And at the moment, I've written a book about my scars. I'm out there. I no longer cover them, both physically still, some of them I do cover, but metaphorically, I speak about them finally after many, many years of actually concealing even from my friends that I had scars. I'm married now, I've got happily, I've got two small children who also kind of in the way of me kind of thinking a lot about my body. I'm very busy, so things kind of going okay at the moment. But in next year, let's say I got divorced or my book contract was cancelled and the next book, I mean, whatever. If something happens, I don't know how I'll feel then about my scars. So maybe I'll have questions again. That's the sort of main thing that I wanted to say, because I think in society at the moment, women are under a lot of pressure to be very beautiful. And I don't want to talk much about this because we know all sort of what's going on in this regard, but we also under opposing pressure, which we less talk about, which is to love and accept ourselves exactly as we are. And it comes from good intentions, but all this sort of, there's a lot of sort of positive body acceptance stuff around, which I think has very good intentions, and for some people work fantastically, but for others like me, maybe I'm more sort of pessimistic, I don't know, but for many people it puts a lot of pressure on us too, but we're supposed to feel in a correct way. So for now, that was a very long answer to your very lovely question. For now, I'm resolved. I don't know what will happen next year. I might have new questions.
I don't.
If we should, Derek, I was also, I hope Sarah comment.
So Denise has asked, she would like to know if you always write non-fiction memoir or if you also write fiction.
Okay, great question. Thank you. So yeah, I'm very, my first book in English, not first book, but first book in English was about non-monogamy, about my glorious failures in non-monogamy. So the reason I'm mentioning it is because I wanted to say I'm non-monogamous in every way, also in terms when I write. I'm not loyal to any genre. So my first, actually, I think I've written in most genres you can think about, apart from children's writing and playwriting or screenwriting. So my first 3 books were in Hebrew. They were published in Israel. And there were 2 novels and then a novella and plus short stories. And in Australia, I wrote 2 books that are described in bookshops and by the publishers as memoirs. The first of them about non-monogamy is a memoir. It's called A Dangerous Bride. But Imperfect, I would not, for marketing, to simplify it, for marketing purposes, it's been called memoir because my story features quite heavily there. But it's really not. It's, I don't know, Denise, how much you know about the genre of creative nonfiction. I think Derek knows quite a bit because we had a bit of, he was in my workshops and we had some conversations online, but creative nonfiction is a very versatile genre, and memoir is one of the subgenres of creative nonfiction. And Imperfect is kind of, I think about it as a hybrid creative nonfiction book because it combines memoir with investigative journalism. I traveled all around Australia and spoke also with people overseas, people who have all sorts of different types of appearance. And I looked at pop culture, so there's quite a bit of cultural criticism there, and it's some essayistic passages. So it's a really sort of mixed book. I think, Sarah, you're on mute.
So another question which actually feeds in with one that I have as well. So I've seen you describe yourself as a confessional writer,
yeah.
But I've also heard you talk about keeping secrets. And so I wondered about the navigation between those, which is somewhat what Denise has asked. She said, how do you know when writing personally themed work, how much of your own stuff to put in and what relates to wider themes?
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful questions, big questions. I need like an hour to talk to really answer them. But I'll try to be very concise. So generally, when I know that the label confessional writer has been pretty derogatory, and I'm sort of proud and I own this label. I think when we think about confessional writing, we think about sort of tell-it-all memoirs where people just sort of spill out everything that happened to them, and sometimes do it in a very sort of unprocessed way that reads more like sort of cathartic writing. And there's a lot of stuff like this around too. But I think about confessional writing more as about writers who draw on life around them as opposed to imagine things. So even my fiction is autobiographical usually, not always, but usually. And the reason I like the term confessional, because for me, confession means urgency. So I did not choose to put myself online and tell all about my sex life, or all about my scars, all about my mother, about my father. I don't believe any writer really, any dedicated serious writer can choose the subject chooses them. And for me, what really sort of, it's a subject urgent to them. And for me, the stuff that is urgent to me is usually based on things I've ever witnessed and really matter to me for some reason. I explore in books or short pieces why they matter to me, or the things that happen to me and I want to understand in writing. Now, how do I know what to put in, what to leave out, and what about secrets? So these are related but different questions. So we talked about questions. So as we were saying before, Sarah and I, every time I start a new work, I have a question I want to answer. So a memoir, it's not an autobiography. Autobiography is the usually stuff more reserved of celebrities. So I'm not Kardashian. And I'm not Barack Obama, so I wouldn't write, nobody really would want to know everything that happened to me ever in my life. Memoirs usually, they sort of one aspect of a person's life that they want to discuss for whatever reason it is. So for me, when I was writing The Dangerous Bride, my first memoir, having sort of written fiction books before, I kind of, like many beginning memoirists, I thought I have to put everything, because I thought, oh, this is my only chance to tell everything about myself, so I better write about everything. So I ended up with loads and loads and loads of material. Totally didn't need to. It took me 5 years to write this book. Until I worked out, you need a question, you need to zoom in, you need to narrow. So once I worked out what my question was in The Dangerous Bride, which was, I've always felt strongly with non-monogamy is my type of sexuality. So why, when I tried it finally, I failed at this so gloriously twice. So my question was, why did I fail? And also, can non-monogamy work? So once I had those lenses, I knew what belonged and what didn't. Same with Imperfect. But with Imperfect, because it was my second creative nonfiction book, I was a little bit sort of less scattered. I understood, I've already got it out of my system, but writing some parts of my life, so I didn't need again to tell everything. So I started from having those questions, and then I knew what belonged into the book. And still my publisher had to rein me, because I had a contract for this book before I started writing it. So I sent him my first chapter and he read it, which was about my childhood in Russia. And of course, there were so many things I wanted to tell about my childhood in Russia, just because I had interesting memories of what that would be entertaining, what that would be quirky. And my publisher said, Lee, the book is about scars, what's going on? So I had to cut quite a bit, but then later I kind of learned from him. With secrets, it's not so much my secrets. I tend not to withhold. Once I set my mind that I'm going to answer a particular question, I try not to withhold. It's very hard. Look, I did not want to tell the whole world in The Dangerous Bride how I choose my underwear when I go shopping. But I ended up, because it was pertinent to one of the chapters. So I don't have many secrets when I have a topic, but the problem with memoir writing and autobiographical fiction as well is that we are not islands. Our stories are always somebody else's stories. So what do you do then? So it's a very big discussion, but just very quickly how secrets come into here. So I've got this ethical rule I've set to myself. Every writer has their own rules, ethical guidelines, I believe, that they set to themselves. And mine is tell your story, not their secrets. By which I mean, for example, in Imperfect, I had to talk quite a lot about my history of sexuality, because my scars and my sexuality are closely related. So whenever I sort of talked about a partner I had, I would think in a way that if I have some story to tell about my partner which is potentially compromising, of course I tried also, I didn't give anybody their real names unless they wanted me to, but if I told a story which is potentially compromising for this person, if it related directly to my own story and it impacted my story in some way, I would tell it. But there were lots of details which were quirky and vivid and colorful, entertaining, but I could have told, but they did not sort of impact on me directly. So I chose not to tell them, because to me, in my ethic, I'm not saying that every writer needs to be like me. Everybody works their own sort of guidelines, but for me, it was not the right thing to do. I saw we had some comments there. I don't get to read them because they are sort of I go on.
Yeah. Yes. The comments at the same time. I was actually going to ask whether you remember the first memoir or piece of confessional writing by someone else that you read that had an impact on you, or that made you realize that you could do that yourself, or inspired you to do that yourself?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I was younger, I was writing fiction mostly because that's all I knew about. I began as a writer very young. I was even before I was 20. Because I was a young journalist when I lived in Israel. They have this sort of program, national program for young journalists, which I somehow got accepted into, and so I started writing very early. But all I knew in Israel at that time, but you could write either journalism or fiction. We didn't sort of know much about new journalism, what was going on in America, John Didion, all those sort of Norman Mailer, all those amazing writers. Maybe I didn't know, but I think I really can't remember books in creative nonfiction genre coming out in Israel in that time, at least not sort of noticeable books. So I just didn't know what else to write. But I always was drawn to more autobiographical fiction where you feel that there's a lot at stake for the author, but it's urgent. So, for example, Erica Jong, Fear of Flying was my kind of go-to novel. And Milan Kundera, the Czech novelist, Czech French novelist, who wrote a lot of very sort of postmodern, experimental, quirky fiction, but it was always rooted in his experience. You just could see what his experience as an immigrant, as a former dissident, as a person who is an exile really in the Western world. You could see that was sort of coming straight from his guts. And then I came to Australia, and this is really embarrassing how late I came to creative nonfiction. But I was in my I think I was about 30 already. And again, maybe this is relatively young, but I started writing, as I was saying, when I was a teenager. And I consider myself to be well read. And then suddenly I just went to a bookshop and I saw a book by Anne Davison, who passed away, since. The Australian journalist is amazing, amazing woman. She also wrote this very famous book about her son who died from schizophrenia. I forget the name. Do you remember, Sarah, that book? Tell me. I'm here, maybe I can't. Anyway, Anne Davison, she is amazing. But I went to a bookshop and I saw her book called Resilience. And I was then studying social work, and I thought, oh, resilience, great, right up my alley. I'm going to learn, read this nonfiction book, serious nonfiction book. And I bought it, and I was just mesmerized from the start, because what Anne Davison did in that book is what I kind of, in a roundabout way, probably did in Imperfect. She set herself a question. And that's what I love about creative nonfiction. You set yourself a question, and then you don't have to worry about all the machinery of the scene setting, character invention. You just pull on whatever you want, and take whatever you want to answer your question. It's such a freedom. And that's what Anne Davison did in that book, Resilience. So she asked herself, why are some people more resilient than others? And what does being resilient mean? And she interviewed lots of different people, and she watched documentaries. She did lots of stuff, and she drew her own story of losing her son and of losing marriages, etc. So there was quite a lot of so-called, again, confessional element, but it was not written in a confessional way. It was written in a very artful way. And that was the first book that made me see that there's a huge world out there. Today, recently I read this book. I still enjoyed it. I was not as awed by it as I was when I was 30, because since then I read so many other amazing creative nonfiction books. But because of the revelation, I would say that was the one. Thank you.
Look, well, I'm writing a memoir, and I'm still, I believe, uncovering the central question. I had an idea to start with, and then I've started writing things, and it's kind of getting a little bit broad and spread out over all the aspects of my life. And I think I need to bring it back in and focus. But on the other hand, I also want to write about some of these other things that are coming up. So now I'm wondering, have I got 2 books or 3 books inside, and do I put some on hold, or do I try to work on them all at the same time, or what?
Derek, it's fascinating. It's a great question to ask. And by the way, Denise, I saw your lovely, lovely message. Thank you. Derek, I actually, you're giving me an opportunity to retract something I said before. You know how I said, okay, so I found my question, sounded so simple. Then I knew what belonged to my book and what didn't. Not exactly like that. So if I'm answering in a roundabout way, but I promise I'll answer what you mean. Like, I'll come back to what you were asking. So when I was writing, when I wrote The Dangerous Bride, the book about non-monogamy, I ended up giving it subtitles. So it ended up being called Memoir of Love, Gods, and Geography. So what happened was I had lots and lots and lots of material, a lot of this which did not belong into the book. Like, I think in your case, it sounds like you also sort of want to go pretty broad. I don't know if you've written it already or not, but you have a lot of material. When I found the question and I narrowed down, I started sort of leaving just the bits about non-monogamy in the book. Suddenly I realized that I could not think about my history of love, especially non-monogamous love, without also looking at my story of migration, because it was in Australia that I finally got the opportunity to practice it. Israel is a bit more conservative country. It was harder to find a partner who would be interested in having a go at this like I was. And I also understood that I cannot speak about my sexuality without thinking about the religious household, religious family I was brought in, and how because that affected really my desire in many different ways. I often live against a sort of a rebel, so I often live against whatever I'm supposed to do. So I think these books, they have a clear focus, but they also digress in some ways. Firstly, because real life is never just linear, as probably Derek, you know very well yourself.
I get
Secondly, Secondly, if you only have one kind of line that you bring in a book all the time, it stops being interesting for the reader. You're not surprising them; they always know what they're going to get. So when I mentor writers, that's often the problem with first drafts, but they're very, unlike mine. I think that you and I sort of write a bit in a similar headspace. There's other, so we make them maybe the sort of, we have the difficulty of focusing, where some other writers have the difficulty expanding outside of the topic. And I think richness is good. So if I were you, now I'm coming back to you, see? So if I were you, I would, how many words do you have so far?
At the moment, I've got about probably 12,000.
How much?
12,000.
Okay, that's not that much yet. Okay.
No.
Well, I think you just go freely, write what you need to write. And when you have more material, then you'll be zooming in. Then it's a good time to zoom in, see what belongs. And you may find out that things you wrote about that you thought completely were not related will relate somehow.
Yeah.
So don't get discouraged by sort of having broad stuff now. It's a really great time actually to brainstorm. I remember, this is very quickly, last thing I'll say, because I know we're running out of time. But I remember when I was writing The Dangerous Bride, I found myself even writing stuff like, I wrote my views on Russian poetry, and I thought, what the hell am I doing? How is that going to fit into the book? It did. It became a part of the book about Soviet poets and their gruesome deaths, some of them.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yes, we've actually met our time, 12:30. So thank you.
I talk too much.
No, that's great. That was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you. Our next live author event, Heroines Book Month, will be this coming Monday at 5 p.m, where we have the author Julie Jansen speaking about her novel Benevolence. And if you would like to join Lee again, she's going to be speaking on Saturday the 7th of November from 7 till 7:30 about her book recommendation, which is Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Greeley. And finally, we would love to have you over on our discussion boards on the Circle platform to join the discussion about all of these wonderful novels. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again during the month.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Derek and Denise. So lovely to see you and meet you.
Thank you.